The cold demeanor of the elite female doctor melted away, revealing a vulnerable woman. "I need you," she whispered. Unable to resist her heartfelt plea, "My name is Kyle, and I'll be turning 36 this year. I work as a freelance writer. Leveraging my previous experience as a doctor, I now write about medical topics. There's a good demand for my work, so I'm not in urgent need of work. Up until 3 years ago, I worked as a doctor at a university hospital. I don't like to brag, but I was quite popular among the patients. I believe I was the best surgeon among my peers. But these days, I've distanced myself from my old friends from medical school and my time as a doctor. To be frank, I don't want to see them. Many colleagues look down on me for leaving the university hospital. I know they say behind my back that I ran away from the demanding environment. Even though my salary has dropped significantly since then, I'm quite content with my current job and lifestyle." Then, out of the blue, I received news that my old mentor had passed away. A friend informed me that Professor Johnson, a mentor of mine from my college days, had passed away. For a moment, the news left me speechless. To me, Professor Johnson was not just a mentor but also someone I had a complicated history with. A friend asked, "You're coming to the funeral, right?" I hesitated for a moment but managed to reply, "I will." Professor Johnson was a devout Catholic. The funeral was originally supposed to be held at the church Professor Johnson attended, but due to the large expected turnout, it was moved to a funeral home in New York City. Still, many priests and nuns were present, and the funeral mass went on without a hitch. I wasn't familiar with the hymns and was attending a Catholic funeral for the first time, so I just followed the crowd. Many of the faces at the funeral were friends and colleagues I'd been avoiding, making me feel out of place. Some were whispering and glancing in my direction. I think I was the first of my college classmates to leave the front lines of medicine early. Most of my peers are still working hard as doctors. I decided to leave as soon as the funeral was over. I somewhat regretted attending, feeling this wasn't where I belonged. As I lay flowers on Professor Johnson lying in his coffin, I recall a conversation I once had with the professor. It was the talk that had pushed me to leave the university hospital. I always wanted to ask him what he really meant by those words. And even now, those feelings hadn't changed. After the funeral, I watched as Professor Johnson's coffin was taken away. The funeral's main mourner was Professor Johnson's wife. Our eyes met, and I gave a slight nod. She smiled kindly at me. Suddenly, a voice behind me snapped, "Look, who finally showed up. The very man who betrayed Professor Johnson." I was grabbed by the shoulder and forcibly turned around. It was a former colleague and classmate from college. Now a top surgeon at the university hospital, Emily. She had been a close friend during our time at the university hospital, and my ex-girlfriend. Her eyes were red, probably from crying. But her face was filled more with anger than sadness. And that anger was directed at me. I felt her grip tighten. I was more concerned about her hurting her hand than the pain I felt. Her right hand is the hand that saves many patients. She's not just any random right-hand woman. If you exert that much force, you'll hurt your finger. Emily's eyes widened at my words. The next moment, she forcefully removed her hand from my shoulder. "Why bring this up now? Go back to the countryside, you loser." Pushing away our mutual friends who tried to intervene, Emily hurled insults at me. Coward, loser, deserter, irresponsible, I've heard them all before. I felt like laughing at the absurdity, hurriedly covering my mouth with my hand. The more seriously Emily cursed me, the more ridiculous I felt. "It's okay to scold me, but don't you have anything else to say, Emily? I'm tired of hearing the same things." Even though I knew I was provoking her, my sarcastic tone remained unchanged. Emily's face turned bright red with anger and embarrassment. She had always been like this. Always trying to do the right thing, always taking patients seriously. But her strict attitude towards both herself and others often led to misunderstandings. The harder she tried, the less patients liked her, leaving her isolated at work. Yet, her spirit and ideals never wavered. She probably didn't realize that her diligent attitude, without any arrogance about her own skills, was almost suffocating for me. I looked at Emily, who was glaring at me while breathing heavily, with pity. She never doubts that what she knows is the only truth. I find Emily's candor like that annoying. Raising your voice and causing a scene here, is this the education my father provided? If so, he failed as an educator. The one who broke the tense atmosphere between me and Emily was a woman with a deep, commanding voice. All eyes turned to her. A woman wearing a black morning dress and a veiled top hat stood there. Wearing a top hat meant she was a relative of Professor Johnson. I recalled, she's the professor's only daughter. Wait, what? I understood that she was Professor Johnson's daughter, but I was taken aback. I thought I was meeting her for the first time, but underneath that black veil was a familiar face. Then I remembered that her last name was also Johnson. Kyle, thank you for attending my father's funeral. The woman, who addressed me in a monotone without bowing, was Ava Johnson, whom I often saw at the publishing company building. Although we wrote in completely different genres, we both freelanced for the publisher and often met at related parties. Ava, famous among us writers for her audacity, unconventional approach, and beauty, was someone I'd occasionally grab a drink with. What? Ava is Professor Johnson's problematic daughter. Unable to contain my surprise, I blurted out. Ava frowned, replying, "Choose your words carefully. Why didn't you tell me sooner? You never asked." The fact that Professor Johnson's only daughter was famous among his students for being a problem child. Professor Johnson occasionally complained about her. Professor Johnson, who was adored as a personable professor, was often asked by his students what kind of person his only daughter was, whom he could not handle. Who would have thought my writer friend, Ava, was that very person? So you're the professor's daughter. I've heard quite a bit about you." Emily's face couldn't quite hide her irritation as she greeted, with a sense of doing it out of obligation. After all, she's the daughter of our mentor. We couldn't afford to be rude. Ava stared at Emily with an emotionless expression. "Emily, right. My father often mentioned you were an excellent surgeon. It's our first time meeting, isn't it?" Ava's overly polite response seemed incredibly condescending to me, who knew her usual demeanor very well. Without a doubt, Ava was mocking Emily. "This is between him and me. It has nothing to do with you, young lady, does it?" Kyle is my friend. I'm not the type to stand by and watch a friend get wrongly blamed." Ava replied with a sly smile, tilting her head slightly. "I know her all too well. The angrier she gets, the more she smiles." And I was sure that she didn't step between Emily and me for my sake. "It's not about blaming him. I just want Kyle to come back to the university hospital." Professor Johnson had always hoped for that too. He always cared about Kyle. Hearing Emily's words, old memories became vivid in my mind. It was back when I worked at the university hospital. Emily and I, once lovers, both strived and pushed forward in our careers as doctors, I believe. I took pride in my work. I have grown accustomed to being called doctor by my patients. Professor Johnson looked unusually downcast that day. His face was gloomy, devoid of his usual smile. Concerned, I asked, "Is everything all right?" Professor Johnson murmured, "It's about my daughter." She has both the ability and academic performance to become a doctor, but she's adamant about not taking the medical school entrance exam. He said she has a nightly battle with her mother, who tells her to apply to medical school. To be honest, I'm fine with either decision. I've even considered adopting a son-in-law, but she's against that idea too. What should I do? The Johnsons has been famous for being a family of doctors for generations. He choked on his words, saying that it would be a shame to end it in his generation. I can't understand what's so bad about becoming a doctor. It's beyond my understanding. I carelessly blurted out. Professor Johnson looked at me a little surprised. A hint of surprise in his eyes, and then his expression hardened. I now realize how arrogant I was back then. Being constantly addressed as doctor and revered by my patients, I felt like my job was superior to others. I was intoxicated with the idea of saving lives. Thinking too highly of myself. Professor Johnson didn't miss the arrogance in my heart. Kyle, one day you might face challenges in this medical profession. It won't be just your problem. It might also affect the patients whose lives are in your hands. Confused, I couldn't grasp what Professor Johnson was trying to convey. Seeing that his words weren't getting through to me, he let out a deep sigh. I was aware I had disappointed him, but I couldn't figure out exactly why. However, it is hard to understand which words and which attitude disappointed the professor so much. You're bound to stumble. You should leave before that happens. He left me with those words. Only when he turned the corner of the hallway did I realize he meant I should leave the hospital. I was considered one of the top students among Professor Johnson's mets, and he had told me to leave. More than shock, anger bubbled up. For the first time, I felt a clear resentment towards Professor Johnson. Carrying that anger, I went on with my afternoon appointments. And that day turned into a storm of complaints. Of course it did. I think I unfairly took out my frustration on a patient. I wonder where my calm self went, drowning in self-loathing. Over the weekend, I handed in my resignation. Watching Emily work and comparing with myself, I realized I was no longer needed at this hospital. I was deeply impressed by Emily, who, despite being called a top-tier doctor, humbly and earnestly tried to save her patients. Perhaps Professor Johnson was concerned about me for that very reason. Emily wants me back at the hospital, but I believe Professor Johnson didn't feel the same way. Emily, you're lying, right? I bet Professor Johnson never said he wanted me back. Upon hearing my words, Emily looked surprised, saying, "Oh." For the first time, I explained to Emily why I left the university hospital. I told her that it was Professor Johnson's words that made me realize I shouldn't be a doctor. Both Emily and my colleagues listened to my confession with bated breath. I left the hospital because I was sick of my own immaturity as a doctor and as a person. Even after hearing the truth, Emily couldn't accept it and kept arguing with me. I'm tired of hearing her repeated why and how come. Professor Johnson just wanted to motivate you. You misunderstood him. Come back to the hospital. Let's start over, okay? Emily, unable to accept what I said, was desperate to persuade me. I'm right, and you're wrong. It seemed to be written on Emily's face that this was why she had to make it right. Ava watched Emily expressionlessly. Suddenly, Ava shifted her gaze from Emily to me. Our eyes met instantly. Ava smiled slyly when our eyes locked. We are students of Professor Johnson. Be proud and confident, Emily exclaimed, almost shouting. I get it. My father was a respectable doctor and professor, but he got sick and couldn't beat the disease. Ava's words took Emily by surprise. All the proud and brilliant students couldn't save my father. Ava threw those harsh words at Emily. Ava is trying to verbally overpower Emily. I've heard that when Professor Johnson collapsed, Emily was the one on duty that night. The person most regretful about not being able to save Professor Johnson's life was Emily herself. Emily bit her lower lip, to which Ava smiled faintly. "Your dedication and emergency treatment were admirable, but that's it. My father passed away." Faced with this brutal reality, Emily seemed to want to cover her ears. Her body was shaking slightly. "But he can't even do that," Ava said slowly, pointing at me. "If Professor Johnson had been brought in, could I have treated him? I'm sure I won't be able to stay calm. I might have panicked and run away." Feeling exposed, I was lost for words. I'm a coward. Still, that's why I'm scared of facing the medical field on my own. I want your support. I was taken aback by the sight of Emily that I had never seen before. "I need you." Those were Emily's true feelings. She collapsed to her knees, tears streaming down her face. I wanted to comfort her, but I felt I wasn't worthy. Crying, Emily kept saying, "I want you to be with me." Looking down at her with a smile, Ava watched her. Then, making sure Emily didn't notice, Ava gently kicked my leg, urging my indecisive self. After that kick, Ava silently walked towards the exit. Her back was straight, showing no hesitation. It felt as though she displayed a genuine strength, unlike the facade shown by Emily. I gently knelt beside Emily, speaking to her softly. I offered her the most comforting words I could muster. "I can support you from afar, and I'll always be watching over you." It had been 7 years since Professor Johnson passed away. There wasn't any specific memorial service, so all I could do was offer a silent prayer in my heart. In front of me sat Emily, aged gracefully over those 7 years, with a smile. I turned on my voice recorder and began the interview. Recently, Emily had successfully performed one of the world's most challenging surgeries. The fact that she was a female surgeon of Canadian descent was making headlines. I never went back to the university hospital. Instead, I continued my career as a freelance medical writer. After Professor Johnson's funeral, I think my relationship with Emily improved a bit. Emily never again told me to come back to the hospital, and I began interviewing my former classmates and colleagues from the university without any avoidance. Many doctors confided in me, telling me stories they wouldn't share with other writers. I have become quite valued among publishers. This time, Emily agreed to give me an exclusive interview. No other publishers or writers had managed to interview her firsthand. "Your reputation has changed a lot after the surgery, hasn't it?" Upon my question, Emily nodded slightly with a troubled expression. While she was glad to be recognized, she didn't want the excessive attention. She wanted to prioritize her time with her patients rather than being tied up with too many interviews and such. She stated this in her typical straightforward manner. I didn't achieve this with my strength alone. It feels like there was some kind of trigger, right? With a casual demeanor, I questioned her. Emily gave me a brief, sharp look. I pretended not to notice and smiled back. "Yes, my classmate who got scared and fled the scene, and the daughter of my mentor who harshly criticized me. These two fueled my competitive spirit. I clawed my way up, telling them not to underestimate me." While she was smiling, her eyes weren't. It seemed she held a deep grudge about that time. I responded with a detached tone that must have been tough, and proceeded with the interview. I talked for nearly an hour, and the interview was over. The moment I turned off my voice recorder, Emily said, "I'm beat," stretching out big. "You didn't have to be so formal in your answers, you know." When I said this to the seemingly tense Emily, she responded, "I couldn't just take it lightly. I mean, who knows what you're going to write?" When she becomes casual, it feels like we're back in our college days in an instant. By the way, I met Ava recently. Emily said this with a somewhat troubled smile. It seems she bumped into Ava when she visited Professor Johnson's grave the other day. At that time, Ava talked about why she had said certain things during the funeral. Seems she wanted to bring me down to hell. Her plan worked perfectly, Emily said, taking a sip from her now cold coffee. Why, if it's related to Professor Johnson, that's more than just holding a grudge. I raised my voice when I learned that Ava had intentionally attacked Emily. Back then, I defended Ava's rude behavior, thinking she was just distraught over losing her father. Well, about that. With a wry smile, Emily told me the truth that Ava had shared. She couldn't stand the girl who lived with the boy she liked. Wait, what? Caught off guard by this unexpected twist, I replied in surprise. I never noticed any signs that Ava had feelings for me. And certainly not now. Has it always been just me in your heart? Emily asked, pointing at my chest. For the past 7 years, no, probably since we broke up. That's how I've felt deep inside. This feeling that I have been hiding inside me for a long time. We've been stubborn, but it seems like it's time for us to move on. Ava, you know, she's a genius at reading people. Don't praise another woman when one's confessing her feelings to you with all her heart. Emily puffed up her cheeks. She was just like the Emily I dated in college. It was a nostalgic side of Emily. We sure took the long way round. I feel like we can walk through life together from now on. Now, how should I convey this to Emily? I carefully chose my words, wanting to tell her just that. Hope you enjoyed this. Subscribing to our channel will be a great encouragement for us. See you in the next video. Let's start from where we left off last time. Right here. Before I knew it, she came up behind me, taking the coffee cup from my hand, and looked at me with moist eyes. My heart raced. Everything that had happened with her, it all started that night. Robert Thompson. Just as I was about to sit on the waiting room couch, my name was called. The voice sounded somewhat curt. Was it because I was late for my scheduled time? It's not like I wanted to be late. I told them in advance I'd leave on time because I had a dentist appointment, but my manager, Amy, held me back. She always does this on purpose. Darn that female boss, Amy. I rushed into the examination room, where the dentist was impatiently looking at my X-ray. It's not a cavity. It's not. While sitting on the examination chair, I blurted out in surprise. The pain in your tooth is due to clenching. It's not just grinding your teeth while you sleep, but you are constantly clenching your teeth unconsciously. Are you under any stress at work or something? He hit the nail on the head. I'll give you some painkillers again, but be aware and try not to clench your teeth. I was stunned. So, when humans feel stressed, they have a habit of clenching their teeth, and clenching them constantly can cause them to ache. Most of my stress comes from my female boss, Amy. After all, she has the mentality that a subordinate's success is her success, but their failures are their own. She throws a fit if things don't go her way, and she constantly nitpicks. She has a knack for making snide remarks to subordinates she doesn't like. The fact that my toothache might be because of the boss. The dentist's office was on the 3rd floor of a 27-story mixed-use building located nearby my office. I finished my checkup just after 7:30 in the evening. I waited for the elevator, planning to eat dinner in the underground food court. Unusually, there was no one else around. When the descending elevator arrived, "Is the first floor okay for you?" I wanted to say basement floor, but what came out was a simple yes. She probably works for a company located in this building. We had shared the elevator a few times before. She's a stunning beauty. I mean, drop-dead gorgeous. She always stands by the control panel, holding the open button for everyone to get on and off, then quickly presses the close button before exiting. I had secretly nicknamed her Elevator Lady and always looked forward to catching a glimpse of her in the elevator. But I never expected to run into her after my dentist appointment and to have a moment alone with her. I found myself wishing the elevator would just stop for some reason, when suddenly I felt a strong jolt from below. It's an earthquake. The elevator has actually stopped. The lights went out and the emergency lights turned on. At the same time, my right arm was suddenly yanked tight. She, in her shock, had grabbed onto my bicep with both her hands. I was frozen, unable to move, just standing there. It felt like a long time. But in reality, it was only a few seconds, maybe several. Then, the elevator began moving again, stopping at the nearest floor and the doors opened. "It's okay now, let's get out." She quickly let go of my arm. Then, blushing, she said, "Oh, I'm sorry," and gave a nod. We both exited the elevator side by side. She nodded again and began to walk away. "Excuse me." Before I could think, I had called out to her. She stopped and looked back at me, and I said, If you'd like, maybe we could grab a meal together." She looked puzzled and tilted her head. "You know, since we both got scared, but I guess that's a bit forward, isn't it?" I felt like I was about to burst into flames. I've never tried picking up anyone before. "Do you think the restaurants are still open after that quake?" And so, we headed to the underground food court. The places were still operating as usual. Wanting to impress, I chose an upscale-looking sushi restaurant. "I'm sorry about earlier." "Hut, for what?" "For grabbing onto your arm." "Don't worry about it. It's not a big deal." She continued, a little shyly, with a smile on her face. "It's been a while since I did that. I used to do it all the time as a kid. I would just cling onto anyone without thinking, but when I was 6 or 7, I got separated from my parents at a fair. I thought I was holding onto my dad's pants in the crowd, but it turned out to be a stranger." "So, you got lost because of that?" When I asked, she replied, "Yes, it was a college-aged guy. He took me to a lost children's area and stayed with me until my parents came. I clung to his arm the whole time." I started to say, "You must have been," but I caught my words, hinting that she must have been adorable. My dad scolded me a lot afterward. He said grabbing people's arms like that is a sign of being spoiled. "Don't rely on others, stand on your own 2 feet," he told me, and that's when I tried to break the habit of clinging to people. So, was today the first time since then? Curious, I asked, and she playfully responded, "Who knows? But anyway, I'm glad I wasn't alone," and she smiled warmly. After that, the conversation drifted to a recent visit to the dentist because of a toothache that wasn't a cavity. We also talked about how our work stress must definitely be because of our bosses. Before I realized it, I was talking more than I usually did. It's not just my current boss. Ever since I was born, there's always been a woman in a position above me. My sisters are 5 and 3 years older than me, and throughout elementary, middle, and high school, all my teachers were women. Even at my part-time jobs, all my bosses have been women. Are you afraid of women or something? No, I don't see it that way. It's just that. Just what? Back in my school days, I had this female friend. She'd often invite me out to drink and stuff. I'd get my hopes up, thinking something might happen, but in the end, she'd say something like, "You are just a safe bet to me." She listened to my lighthearted story with a smile on her face. Every once in a while, she'd brush her hair behind her ear with her right hand. I noticed a small mole on the back of her hand, right around where the base of her thumb is. "Are you sure you're okay with it?" She had suggested splitting the bill, but I declined, saying, "I was the one who invited you." We had forgotten to even exchange names. I couldn't tell her that I'd seen her around before. "Thank you so much for today, and for treating me to dinner." "No problem. Thank you too." She walked toward the train station, looking back and waving 2 or 3 times. Each time, I wanted to call out to her. I wanted to stop her and exchange contact details. But I thought, maybe I'd be bothering her or she might reject me. With those thoughts, I couldn't muster the courage to speak up. Waving back was all I could manage. "Anyway, I'll see her again in the elevator like always." That's what I reassured myself with internally. And as I watched her leave, I realized I was clenching my teeth. Simultaneously, the words of my dentist echoed in my mind. "Be conscious not to clench your teeth." From then on, with a strong desire to meet her again, I'd find reasons to slip out of work and head to that building next to our office. But for some reason, I never bumped into her in the elevator again. Then, one day, "Hey, Robert." While I was working on an urgent task at my desk, I was called by the laid-back voice of Amy. When I reached her office, "You're being transferred to our subsidiary." Amy, with a faint smile, handed me the notice of my job reassignment. "Look, it's that underperforming company. Being sent to such a low-level company, I really feel for you, but maybe it's just right for someone like you. Anyway, use that little brain of yours and make sure the handover is smooth, okay?" My successor was a man from the department next to mine, newly hired mid-career. When the handover process began, he was quick to grasp things and had a pleasant demeanor. He was also fairly well received by our clients. My only concern was that he seemed a bit timid. 2 weeks later, I started at the subsidiary I was assigned to. The commute took about 20 minutes longer than before, but it was manageable. However, because I was unfamiliar with the train line, I barely made it on time that day. Panting, I rushed into the building's elevator. Our office was on the 7th floor. As I reached to press the elevator button for the 7th floor, I noticed the light for that floor was already lit. Going to the 7th floor, I was addressed by a woman standing in front of the control panel. I replied with a nod and looked up at her. What? Why? It was her, the woman from that night of the earthquake. It was a small building. Each floor was occupied by just one company. I've been working for the company on this floor for about a month now. Oh, really? Are you Robert, by any chance? Yes. I had heard someone was being sent here from the parent company. I finally understood the situation from what she said. For a moment, I was taken aback, thinking, could such a coincidence really happen? I'm Emily, the head of Sales Division 1, Team 3 at your new assignment. Unbelievable. She was my new boss. I later found out that the company I was transferred to had business dealings with the company she had worked for until a month ago. Her previous company was a small one, just a tad bigger than a sole proprietorship. The owner of that company had gotten old and decided to shut it down. So, my new company recognized her talents and recruited her. After you. When the elevator reached the 7th floor, she pressed the close button and motioned for me to exit first. Feeling a bit embarrassed, I caught her giving me a warm smile. Thus began my new chapter in life, but our relationship remained strictly professional. Then, one day, she uncharacteristically raised her voice on the phone, saying things like, "That's why it's impossible. At the very least, you need to go through HR." Before hanging up, I approached her with some documents I needed to submit and asked, "Is everything okay?" "No, it's nothing major. I'm sorry for raising my voice." She was clearly flustered. I was curious, but I didn't press further and left her office. At that moment, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a call from a colleague from my old department. I stepped out into the hallway to answer. Yes, this is Rob. Hey, we've got a situation here. Despite saying it's serious, that voice sounded oddly amused. Weren't you having a phone dispute over there just now? Yeah, kinda. The boss called. That guy Jack, he up and quit the company. Jack was my successor, and I was concerned about his timid nature. So the boss lady is fuming, yelling, "What's going on? How can he be so irresponsible? Doesn't anyone know? Guess it's your fault, huh?" It was the first I'd heard that Jack had become the boss's target. Yeah, he took over right from you. I genuinely felt bad for him, but as I was wondering why the boss had called in the first place, my former colleague explained. Since he left so suddenly, we don't have anyone to fill his spot, so they tried to bring you back here for the time being, but you turned them down flat. Amy is steaming mad right now. It all clicked, and I went back into the room. Our eyes met. I felt the need to thank her and gave a nod of appreciation. It didn't take me long to adjust to the new workplace. Perhaps due to the absence of the previous stressors, even my toothache ceased to bother me. Most importantly, work became fun. Of course, because seeing Emily at work was a highlight. And she truly was a catch, always efficient at her job. And providing clear instructions to us, her subordinates. Yet, she never acted arrogant. A stark contrast to that bossy lady back at my old place. The vulnerable image I had of her from that night of the earthquake was nowhere to be found. My secret feelings for her only grew. But I thought they were just unattainable dreams. However, oh, my wallet. On my way home from work and about to hop on the subway, I realized I forgot my wallet at the office. In a rush, I headed back to the company to find Emily there alone. Elbows on the desk and her head cradled in her hands. "You are still here?" "Oh, yeah, just lost in thought." "What brings you back, Robert?" "Left my wallet." "I see." I grabbed my forgotten wallet from the drawer and asked her if she was leaving soon. Maybe I should. "Wait up, let's head out together." With that, the two of us got in the elevator. "I hope it doesn't get stuck again," she murmured, looking up at the elevator's floor indicator. When I turned to her, she was already looking at me. "Is it okay?" I wasn't sure what she meant by okay. The next moment, she suddenly gripped my arm tightly. Much like that night of the earthquake. But this time, even after we stepped out of the elevator and began walking, she didn't let go of my arm. My previous company was a small place. I was persuaded to join this one, but being a manager and leading people, it's quite a challenge. It seems that even she, who always appears confident at work, feels the pressure. "How about grabbing some dinner?" I was thinking the same, but I have two conditions. Suddenly, she let go of my arm and took on a serious demeanor, just like at work. "What are they?" "We'll split the bill." "Okay." "And no sushi places." "Got it." She shrugged and let out a soft chuckle. "Actually, I'm not a fan of raw fish." "So, you pushed yourself that other night?" "Yes," I thought, why not? You treated me after all. We both laughed heartily. As we laughed, she grabbed my arm again, resting her head on my shoulder. She chose a barbecue place near the station. A man and a woman, just the two of us, at a barbecue joint. My heart raced, but she seemed completely unbothered. First, we toasted with draft beers. I glanced at her right hand as she held her mug. I was staring at a mole near the base of her thumb on the back of her hand. What? She noticed where I was looking and seemed puzzled. "Oh, that mole on your hand." "Yeah, I've been self-conscious about it before." "What about the mole?" "Well, actually, me too." Saying this, I showed her the palm of my left hand. "Look, right here." "Oh my, On the palm of my left hand, I also had a mole near the base of my thumb. She laid her right hand over my extended left one. It's a perfect match, almost the same spot. See, she playfully looked at our overlapping hands and said, matching the lines of our palms, it's like fate or something. She made a cheeky face, sticking out her tongue in jest. And so, we began dating. Of course, we never mixed our personal and professional lives. However, our colleagues seemed to have had an inkling about us. Then, about a year and a half later, an unexpected announcement was made. Firstly, the head of the department I was previously in, Manager Williams. The HR department, concerned about the high turnover rate of employees under her direct supervision, conducted interviews and found out about Amy's arrogant behavior. She was removed from her director position and relegated to a less significant role. Then, Emily was chosen as her successor. Transferring from a subsidiary, it was truly a promotion for her. I was chosen to fill Emily's previous role. From tomorrow, we'll be in different departments at work. We can't help it. Anyway, let's start from where we left off the other day. Here, now. Why not? She smiled mischievously. I couldn't suppress the bubbling feelings anymore. Once she sets her mind on something, she won't listen. She took the coffee cup from my hand. I extended my now empty left hand towards her. She placed her right hand over mine. Our palm lines match. It's like fate. The toaster dinged. That's it for now. The toast is ready. Darn. She and I took turns cooking. That day, it was my turn to prepare breakfast, so I was in the kitchen. We had started living together. By the way, the reason we were moved to separate departments is the company's policy that married couples can't be in the same department. Yes. We were newlyweds, fresh into our marriage. Let's continue from where we left off. Come on, let's. My beloved Emily was repeatedly trying to get my attention. Naturally, I presented the palm of my left hand in front of Emily. Then, Emily playfully slapped it away. What's the matter? Still half asleep. It was Emily's voice that made me realize I'd dozed off and had been dreaming of our newlywed days. The sensation of Emily's hand tapping mine brought me back to reality. About the other day, I mumbled, and Emily picked up on it. She gently placed her right hand over my left. Look at us, we've sure aged, haven't we? She looked at her hand with wrinkle and smiled. We've been married for almost 20 years now. Oh, found another gray hair. Let me continue from the other day. Saying that, she began plucking out my gray hairs. It was just after 3 days since she found the gray hairs. I told you not to cause any problems. Stop disrupting the pace of those around you by doing unnecessary things. Before you go lecturing folks from other departments, why don't you start doing your job properly in the sales department? It's annoying for us when you keep acting like you're the new guy. I held back the words I wanted to say to my boss, who looked visibly frustrated. And then, you know what? I wouldn't mind firing you. It doesn't make a difference whether you're here or not. She said this as if it was a good idea, and I felt I had reached my limit. My name is Andrew. After graduating college, I worked at a food processing company. I returned to my hometown when my dad got sick. Thankfully, he's now out of the hospital. However, my dad felt uneasy about leaving my mom alone at home after his health issue. While he was in the hospital, he asked me during a visit, Andrew, would you consider coming back here? So, I resigned from my company and got a job at a local baby product store. Ideally, I would have preferred a job that made use of my previous work experience, but finding a good position for a mid-career hire was tough, so I took a job with this company that was expanding. But moving into a different industry certainly came with its challenges. Andrew, how many times is this? The third time, I guess. It's the fifth. When are you going to remember? This woman who is teaching me the paperwork with a look of utter dismay on her face is the section manager. You did use computers in your previous job, didn't you? Why can't you remember? It's just different formats. No excuses. Just get on with it. Here, this file, right here. Yes, I have other things to do than just babysit you. She snapped, although she continued to help. I felt sorry for her as I struggled with paperwork I wasn't used to. In my previous job, I worked on site in the quality control department, which meant I didn't handle many documents and rarely had to create them. Although I managed to land a job in sales administration at my current company thanks to a certification I got in college, to be honest, I'm lost when they suddenly ask me to draft a document. I had been coasting by on templates alone, and now it was catching up with me. Man, maybe sales just isn't for me. It made me realize just how perfect my former job was for me. Plus, I had a girlfriend back then. She was a diligent office worker at the same company and often picked up the slack for me. But I couldn't muster the courage to ask her, a city girl, to move with me to the countryside, so I ended up breaking things off with her. I miss the lunches she used to pack for me, especially since I'm a bit picky with food. All the women I've dated before didn't like cooking for me. But she always struggled and made meals for me. I didn't want to inconvenience her, a woman who wholeheartedly devoted herself to me. Despite being the one to end things, I still have feelings for her. I returned to my hometown after we split up, but things haven't been great. I contemplate quitting my job almost daily, but since I haven't been at this company for long, it might impact my job hunting prospects. So, for now, I'm just observing how things go. It's pretty much an escape from reality. While I'm discontented with my current situation and anxious about the future, I can't take the next step forward. One day, someone from the planning department brought up a collaboration project with a major food company. Our company is fairly large in the baby product business, and our mascot character is quite popular among customers. While we do well with apparel and toys, our own food brand wasn't selling too well. They wanted to put more focus on the food division, and this idea came up to stimulate interest and generate buzz. From the looks of my colleagues, it seems the other company wasn't too enthusiastic about the collaboration. After many meetings, we finally found a company willing to partner with us, and a meeting was scheduled at our office with their sales representative and our manager. This is a busy day, so don't cause any problems. No unnecessary questions either, my manager warned me in the morning. After finishing some tasks, I headed to the vending machines. On my way, I bumped into a representative from the other company coming out of the conference room. "You're Andrew, right? Don't you remember? We worked together before." "Oh, Tony. Yes, I didn't expect to see you here. Did you leave your previous job? Are you now with the food division here?" He bombarded me with questions. "No, I'm currently in sales," I replied. "Oh," Tony mumbled, almost to himself. "That explains it." "That explains it? What's that supposed to mean?" I was about to ask him when my cell phone rang. It was a call from my manager. Sorry, please go on without minding me. I'll visit again," said Tony, and he left. While my phone continued to ring, I answered it. The first thing I heard was, "You're late. Where are you?" "At the vending. Come back right now." Confused by the abruptly ended call, I returned to my department to see a flurry of activity. One of my colleagues, who had been in a meeting, told me the sample we presented as a product image wasn't well received by the client. "We need a new one by the week after next. Our department and planning are all hands on deck for overtime. You're free, right?" The manager said, "Let Andrew handle the menial tasks." She handed me some documents to copy and went back to her tasks. Menial tasks, huh? Looking around, while the feedback seemed negative, Everyone had a determined spirit, thinking, we still have a chance. Next time, I felt isolated from the group. I may be a burden, but I want to help in some way. That's what I thought. So, I pulled out a notebook where I'd written some half-finished notes and decided to continue writing in it. It was a small thing, but consistency appeared to be key. By reviewing repeatedly, I reduced my mistakes. When I finally had some free time, Mike from the planning department gave me some leftover baby food samples. I'm confident about this one, he said, and I eagerly tasted the carrot puree. And instantly, this is awful, I unintentionally blurted out. Well, it's baby food, it's not supposed to taste that great to adults, someone chuckled. No, this is really not good. It's bitter, and although I can taste the carrot, the broth flavor is overpowering. It's not that different from homemade, so why would parents buy this to feed their kids? I pointed out. While I was just trying to be honest, it seemed that I had overstepped, given I wasn't directly involved in the project. Andrew, you worked in a food company before, right? But you've never dealt with baby food, have you? Not sure your input is really needed here, they retorted. I was about to respond when my manager, who seemed to have overheard the conversation, stopped me. She later told me, I thought I asked you not to cause any trouble. Maybe you don't get it since you joined mid-career, but this is a crucial time for the company. Stop meddling and disrupting everyone's flow. Before you go lecturing people from other departments, do your job in sales properly. It's problematic if you keep acting like a newbie. Honestly, I wouldn't mind if you were let go. It wouldn't make a difference with or without you. Frustrated by her blatant statement, I felt I had reached my limit. Understood. It was a short time, but thank you. I bowed to my manager and went back to my desk to finish up. Even though my contribution might not have seemed significant, the notebook I had been diligently jotting work procedures into seemed pointless now. I ripped it up and left the company. On my way home, I called someone. Hey, it's me. A few days after being fired, I received a call from my manager on my cell phone. What does she want now? So annoying. I considered ignoring it, but the person I was with encouraged me to answer. Hello, Andrew. Can you talk right now? My manager's voice lacked its usual energy. Assuming we wouldn't have much to chat about, I replied, sure, go ahead. Thanks, I'm sorry for what I said the other day. We didn't know you well enough, and both Mike and I shouldn't have said those things. We were just in a meeting with a client and the planning team. They had apparently presented the carrot paste I had severely criticized as a sample in the meeting. Then, Tony said something very similar to what I had mentioned. Do you genuinely think this tastes good? It has a strong bitter taste, and the broth flavor overpowers the carrot. No matter how good the ingredients are, this won't do. You can't expect repeat customers. This is a joint business after all. We need you to think of a product that will sell more. And then, there's a guy named Andrew in sales. You should consider involving him. He used to work for our rival company and was in their quality control department. He's what's called a super taster, someone with more taste buds than average. He's not only gifted in taste but can also accurately recall and compare flavors. I strongly suggest involving him in this project. They decided to continue the meeting next time, with me in attendance. Apparently, it wasn't the right mood to say, Andrew was just fired a few days ago. Please come back. Without you, they won't agree to the main contract. You know our sales projection for this project, right? Food and merchandise combined, it's $5 million. The CEO even said, if this project fails, we'll withdraw from baby food production. So please, my manager pleaded. Ignoring her pleas, I told him, that's so. It's none of my business anymore since I've been fired. I wanted to thank you, manager, for giving me the chance to step away from such a narrow-minded workplace where we couldn't even exchange opinions between departments. Thanks to you, I've come to terms with my feelings. Good luck with the project. I hung up while she was still talking on the other end. "Is everything okay now?" Megan asked while driving. The day I was fired, on an impulse, I called my ex-girlfriend, Megan. I had reached my limit. I just want to hear her voice. In that moment, the word patience did not exist in my vocabulary. Andrew, hearing Megan's voice for the first time in months, I felt deflated. "Megan, I'm going to ask you something really selfish. Please, let's get back together." After a long silence, she responded, "If you let me slap you twice, counting the one from when we broke up, then sure." Thanks to that, my face was swollen today. Looking at my reflection in the car mirror, I asked, "Do you think it's okay to greet people with this face, just as the car stopped at a red light? Considering it's our old place, you look so handsome that they might even feel sympathetic. It's just perfect." Megan, pouting like a child. She has always been my savior, forgiving me no matter how much I hurt her. Apparently, Andrew got fired. Megan had told my previous company. The HR manager contacted me right away, asking, "Would you like to come back?" My replacement hadn't been decided yet, and the remaining team was struggling. Torn between decisions, my mother said, "It's nice to know your dad and you are happy, but it's important to do what you love. I hope you do what you won't regret." With her words, I decided to rejoin. Still, I feel uneasy about living away from my parents, so I think I'll consult with them when buying a house. I need to earn a lot for that. "Welcome back, isn't it too soon?" my colleague Ken joked. But I, donning my pristine work uniform, felt it fit perfectly and replied, "No, I think I realized it too late." That previous project did end up getting cancelled, and the company withdrew from baby food production. Meanwhile, my company ventured into baby food production. I attended the product development meetings as a representative of the quality control department. The environment in which opinions can be exchanged regardless of faction is a meaningful one, and the products that have been launched have been well received by consumers and are selling well, and there is already talk of increasing the variety of flavors and forms to suit different uses, such as travel-sized products. Watching children enjoy the food, I feel fulfilled. There are many foods I don't like, but I want everyone to taste something even I find delicious. Just realizing this made those few months' experiences invaluable to me. Eek, my first love, whom I haven't seen in 10 years. Now, just like in the movies, she's having a Marilyn Monroe moment. When you witness such a scene, you end up seeing things you shouldn't. Because of the guilt of having seen her in such a compromising position, I found myself in a situation where I had to agree to a rather outrageous request. My name is Jason. I'm a 28-year-old office worker. Graduated from college and landed a job at my current company. Working decently, earning a decent salary. All I wanted was a normal life, but things took a different turn when my chief took a special interest in me. "Hey, Jason, get over here now, you slacker." The one summoning me again today is my manager, Robert. He's an old geezer, married with kids. "Yes, what is it, sir?" "What do you mean, what is it? Why didn't you come when I called you immediately?" Every time something doesn't go with his way, he uses me as his verbal punching bag. Even though the reason for his summons is often trivial, he'd give me a lecture just because I took a bit longer to respond. If I made a mistake, I would understand getting yelled at. But it's exhausting being constantly nitpicked and yelled at for the smallest of reasons. I'm exhausted. Another day comes to an end, enduring Robert's verbal abuse. Exhausted, I flopped onto my bed. And then, my cell phone buzzed with a notification. Looking at the screen, there's a message. I rarely get personal messages, so who could it be? The moment I saw the sender's name, my heart leapt. It's from Kathy, my childhood friend, my first love. I'd played with her since I could remember. Our houses were next to each other. Unlike my average family, Kathy came from an upper-class household. Her father is the CEO of an export-import company, and they lived in a huge house next door. We used to play together in the neighborhood, and she would occasionally invite me over. But as we entered middle school, things changed. Though we were childhood friends, we sometimes walked home together. Often, Kathy would talk honestly with me. Kathy was a long-haired girl with an authoritative aura, always taking charge. She was the center of the class, even a member of the student council. An all-rounder, she was also in the school band, the picture-perfect rich girl. But I knew the truth. Kathy was anything but a typical rich girl. She was blunt, casual, and quite a tomboy. I'm so done. I'm sick of pretending for my parents. Why do I have to choose activities based on their wishes? I'm not my dad's copy. On the way home, as the sun began to set, she made remarks that would surely shock our classmates if they heard. The side of Kathy she shows only to me was just like any other ordinary girl. If you feel that way, you should stand up to them. It's the age for it, after all. If I do, they'll lock me up at home. I'd hate that. Kathy's parents were strict. Being the CEO and his wife, they were bound to be, but they put a lot of pressure on Kathy. As a result, her true nature was rebellious. An unseen rebellion, maybe that's the best way to put it. It seemed like her own way of rebelling. If she had to keep up the pretense both at home and outside, it's no wonder her personality became this way. So, I became her refuge where she could be her true self. Their friendship continued, even after we went to different high schools, after Kathy enrolled in an elite all-girls school. It wasn't much, just hanging out on weekends. But the nature of our outings changed a lot. Take that, all right. Turns out Kathy was always at the arcade near my place. And she was dolled up, in flashy clothes, a far cry from the refined lady image she portrayed at school. She said it was her way to blow off steam. She always seemed to enjoy video games anyway. But there were some rough-looking guys frequenting that arcade. Whenever one of them tried to hit on her, she'd use me as an excuse, calling me her boyfriend and bodyguard. Truth be told, I was never really the bodyguard type. Because Kathy, with her innate social skills, quickly befriended those rough guys, and would even thrash them in fighting games. Kathy's so darn good at these games. Your boyfriend sure isn't though. I'm not really into games, alright. Those guys liked Kathy and believed that I was her boyfriend, so they never made a move on her. Jason is just too weak to be any competition. You're good at studies, sports, and even video games. What are you, some kind of genius? On our way back from the arcade, I was always astounded by Kathy's skills. She'd joke, I've been practicing in secret. We kept up this charade of pretending to be a couple. But the truth was, I had feelings for Kathy. But I never had the guts to confess, and I always felt I wasn't good enough for her. Moreover, I didn't want our current relationship to end. Throughout our high school years, we frequently went to the arcade on our dates. But after starting college, I stopped hearing from Kathy. I heard rumors. She got involved with a bad guy or had a fallout with her parents, but I knew all of those were lies. Kathy wouldn't do something so foolish. She probably moved to New York or found a boyfriend. Thinking all this, time flew by. Then, a message from Kathy after 10 long years. And her tone was just as casual as before. Hey Jason, got a favor to ask, can you play my boyfriend again? I chuckled at her unchanged attitude and replied, after a 10-year silence, you asked the same thing. Aren't there better candidates than me? I kept my tone light, just like before. Soon, her reply came. Your messages are still the same, comforting. I want to talk, can we meet up? I was taken aback. A lot changes in a woman in 10 years. The Kathy in my mind was still on the cusp of girlhood. But at 28, she'd be a full-fledged woman. Could I act the same in front of her now? Though I worried. Long time no see, Jason. There was no need for concern. Sure, Kathy had turned into a beauty. She'd cut her hair to a medium length and dyed it brown, which was surprising. She looked stunning, with her flawless skin, elegant makeup, and a lovely dress, far from the school uniform look. Any guy would surely be smitten. But inside, she was still the Kathy I knew. Somehow, it felt incredibly nostalgic, and I was able to act the same way I used to without even thinking about it. It's been a while. You haven't changed a bit, although your appearance has. Of course, I've changed after 10 years, but you, Jason, haven't changed at all. As we chatted, we entered a diner. The diner we used to frequent during our student days was no longer there, but this one had kept the same interior, making it feel oddly nostalgic. So, why did you ask for something like that? You must have a boyfriend, right? No way. Everyone runs away once they get to know the real me. I can see that. You turn into a demon when you're angry. Ouch. I was about to say something when I got a swift kick under the table. That's what I'm talking about, I thought, giving her a look, but Kathy pretended not to know what I meant. My dad, he's been trying to set me up with someone without asking me, I guess because I hadn't gotten a boyfriend yet. Well, your dad is a strict person. That's right, and even though I've been saying no forever, he went ahead and set up a meeting for a potential match. Isn't that too much? I got so mad that I blurted out, I have a boyfriend, so don't do anything weird. Kathy's eyes were distant. While it might be a typical story for a young lady, it's definitely not okay to arrange a meeting without considering the person's feelings. It's no wonder Kathy was angry. But apparently, the other party wasn't deterred even after hearing she had a boyfriend. He said he was better than my boyfriend, as if he could compare to you, Jason. So, please, just this once, just pretend to be my boyfriend one more time. Kathy said that, her head bowed, almost as if she were about to kneel on the table. But I couldn't answer her right away. This wasn't just some childhood play acting. If we mess this up, it could cause trouble for Kathy. Let me think about it. So I said. Kathy looked a bit sad, but she smiled and said, that makes sense. It's natural to want some time to think. Sorry, I got ahead of myself. Even though she smiled, it was awkward. I broke the tension by suggesting, shall we go outside? And we both left the diner. But it was still awkward. What should I do? I was thinking about it while we walked. Whoa. Suddenly, her dress blew up. Like Marilyn Monroe's iconic scene. She held her skirt down with all her might. It was like something out of a movie. Looking closer, I noticed she was standing over an air vent. She must have unknowingly walked over it, and unfortunately, the wind blew through. The wind stopped, and her skirt returned to normal. But she was glaring at me with an angry look. You saw it, didn't you? I didn't see. Why are you talking like that? I didn't see. Seriously. I wasn't thinking you were wearing white. You did see. I ended up digging my own grave and got hit by Kathy. A week later, I ended up agreeing to play the role of Kathy's boyfriend. That was because after the incident, Kathy puffed up her cheeks and told me, you have to take responsibility for seeing, and I gave in. Well, it can't be helped that I saw, even if it was an accident. Kathy said, you don't have to think it's a bother, let's just do it casually, like before. She told me that. She did say it, but it's not that simple. Man, I cursed my bad luck. I mean, What is Jason here? Turns out, my potential date was none other than the son of my annoying manager, Robert, named Derek. And naturally, Derek's dad, Robert, was there too. I had a bad feeling about this. I am dating Kathy. When I confidently said that, Robert, even before sitting down, pointed at me and blurted out, "What? A loser like you? Are you blackmailing Kathy or something? She deserves better. Everyone at the company knows you're useless. You're just a scumbag who can't vent his frustrations without taking it out on others." I wanted to retort that he was the one being described, but I held back. I was amazed he could say such things before our date even started. Kathy looked taken aback. Sadly, it seemed Robert's domineering attitude wasn't just professional, Derek had inherited it. As soon as the day began, Derek wouldn't let me get a word in edgewise and started boasting about his accomplishments without being asked. Granted, on paper, he seemed impressive, but in between his boasts, he'd look down on me and say in tune with his father, "I can make you happier than he can. I bet you've had a hard time with a guy like that. Don't worry, I'll take care of everything." When he said that, even Kathy's father, Tom, was taken aback. They may want to put me down and raise their stock, but they are just sinking, and fast. They don't even realize how fast they are plummeting, like they are diving through the earth and into outer space. With Robert and Derek laughing and berating me, I was trying to figure out my next move. I was thinking hard, but Kathy beat me to the punch. "What is your problem? I can't stand you insulting the man I love, and stop promising happiness when you don't even know me." Watching Kathy like this, Derek nonchalantly replied, "No matter who you truly are, I'll still love you." Upon hearing this, Kathy said, "Then, I'll show you the real me. Follow me." She stood up and led us to a place. It was an arcade, a place we used to frequent. I won't date someone who's worse at games than me. Arcade. I love video games. It's a hobby I've hidden even from my dad. Only Jason knows. Seeing that, Kathy stormed into the arcade. I figured she's done hiding her true self from her dad, so I quickly explained that I've been going to the arcade with Kathy since forever. Tom gave me a cold stare, but he didn't say anything. And where she took us was a section filled with fighting games. If you're really that great, Derek, you should be able to win, right? I mean, how are games useful in real life? Excuse me, don't belittle gaming, it's fun. A life without shared hobbies would be so boring. Kathy went off on him and we ended up competing in a three-way score challenge. But it wasn't a fighting game, it was a shooting game, like a target practice. The only game where I could beat Kathy. Needless to say, I won. Derek, frustrated, said, "This wasn't the deal. I don't want to marry a rough girl like this," and ran off. Robert glared at me and muttered, "You'll pay for this," before leaving. And they left. Left behind were me, Kathy, and her father. Tom yelled, wasting time on such frivolous games. Naturally, he was angry. But Kathy shot back, "You always decide everything for me. And when I stand up to you, you just yell without listening. No wonder I want to escape into gaming." As I tried to mediate, Tom said, "This is probably why you can't find a wife." I lost my temper and snapped back. "I'll marry Kathy, so stop judging her based on her personality. Why are you always criticizing your own child? Kathy isn't a copy of you." Both were taken aback. Kathy, with wide eyes, whispered, "That was my line. Right, it's not a copy of the parent." This is something Kathy once said. I bet they didn't expect to hear such complaints. Tom remained silent. Maybe it hit too close to home. Feeling awkward, I said, "Anyway, please talk it out, parent and child," and ended the meeting. Did I go a bit overboard? With that thought, I went to work the next day. But my desk was gone. Instead, there was a note about a personal transfer. I was informed that I was being relocated to the middle of nowhere, something like rural Nebraska. Panicking, I asked Robert, "What's going on here?" But he just said, "Can't you see? We don't need incompetence." That was the end of that conversation. Apparently, someone reported a major mistake someone else had made, as if I was the one responsible. They seemed pretty ticked off about the incident the day before. It was sheer retaliation. "You should just keep quiet down at the bottom. Who do you think you are, challenging us?" And that's how I ended up being shipped off to rural Nebraska. Voices like mine, just a regular employee, never get heard. Now, I have to move ASAP, and I'm swamped with packing. At that time, I received a call from Kathy asking me to come over to her place. I told her I was busy with the move, but she even offered to help with my relocation. I realized I had spoken out of turn, and honestly, I wanted to apologize to Tom. When I visited her home, for some reason, Tom was bowing deeply in apology to me. "I'm sorry. We put you through so much. Kathy told me you've been acting as her boyfriend and have been supporting her all this time." What? I'm a fool. Thanks to you, I realized. Just because I can do something doesn't mean Kathy can, and what I can't do, Kathy might very well be able to. Apparently, after that matchmaking meeting, Kathy had a heart-to-heart talk with her father. Seeing sides of his daughter he hadn't known existed made him realize how little he'd been observing her. Moreover, Kathy got to hear Tom's true feelings. Turns out, Kathy's parents had a kind of arranged marriage, much like the older generation in the U.S. Daniel had initially been engaged to a woman he fell in love with, but she cheated on him, leaving a deep scar. Later, through an arranged setup, he met Kathy's mother and built the happy family they have now. That's why Tom thought an arranged marriage isn't bad, and I found more happiness in that than in a love marriage. Kathy said she had a boyfriend, but what if she ended up abandoned like me? I don't want that for her. Such fears made him insist on choosing a husband for his dear daughter through matchmaking. While that's not something to be praised, at the core of Tom's actions was a strong desire to protect his daughter. "I hope you'll continue to be by my daughter's side. You're the only one who truly sees her." For the first time, I felt acknowledged by Kathy's family. But I'm being relocated to Nebraska soon. When I told Kathy, she looked shocked and seemed to understand the situation. "It's not to atone, but if you're open to it, how about working for us?" "Excuse me." "Exactly. Instead of staying at a company with such a terrible boss, why not come to ours?" I wondered if it was all right to think like that, but honestly, I had been considering switching jobs. If I'm going to be demoted anyway, maybe it's all right to just quit. Thinking like that, I surprisingly said, "In that case, I appreciate the offer," and switched jobs. Having worked in sales for a long time, I got along at the new company more than I expected, but that's a story for another day. Later on, I heard that Robert got demoted in my place, but I don't really care about that anymore. By the way, we officially started dating. Well, after all, I had declared my intentions, even saying I'd marry her. It's the first time we've walked together as a couple. True that. Doesn't feel much different, though. You always say stuff like that. Saying that, Kathy accompanied me on my way home. For the first time since becoming a couple, we walked hand in hand. I wished we could have done this sooner. If I had been braver, maybe I wouldn't have had to pretend to be her boyfriend. So, I won't hesitate anymore. "Hey, Kathy." "What?" "I love you." "It's about time you told me." Both of us said that and walked hand in hand, laughing together.